Service. When have you ever had to forgive someone? Yeah, if we're married, we do it all the time, don't we, Daryl? That's right. My guess is that you've had to forgive someone more than once, but it's not easy, is it? It's absolutely not easy. And the closer we are to the person who has hurt us, the harder it becomes, because that wound is so much bigger. That spiritual and emotional hole that has been left in the wake of whatever happened is so much bigger that it takes more work to forgive. Some of our bitterest and deepest hurts are from the people who are supposed to love us. Our biblical character for today, Joseph, he knew a little bit about hurt and betrayal from loved ones and the necessary forgiveness needed to heal. He went through extraordinary hardships, and yet through them all, his faith remained steadfast. Now we might, as we hear about Joseph, we might want to ask ourselves, what was it about Joseph's faith that made him so resilient? Now, you might remember Joseph's story in the Old Testament, but just in case you need a little bit of a refresher from your Sunday school days, or you're just not that familiar with him, here's a little loose, non-seminarian Cliff Notes Tabitha version of Joseph, all right? Joseph was the son of Jacob and Rachel. Now, Jacob, like all of those biblical patriarchs, he had more than one wife at a time, which is always a recipe for success. Jacob had many sons. All of Joseph's older brothers were the sons of Jacob's first wife. And so the family gets complicated in a hurry. Now, I don't know if anybody here can relate to families being complicated. Maybe just a little, all right? Now, the details in this story and in our stories today might have changed those small details, but things like, resentment and jealousy, those things are still present today, yeah? So those 10 older half-brothers of Joseph, they got really mad at him, and they hatched a plan to kill him. Because they felt that he was their father's favorite. So that's some brotherly love right there. Now, one brother kind of, sort of, half-heartedly said, I don't think that's a good idea. So they decided to sell him into slavery instead and tell their dad he had been mauled by a lion. So those passing traders that bought Joseph took him down to Egypt. And in Egypt, Joseph was bought by a rich man and put in charge of the man's household until the man's wife falsely accused Joseph of sexual assault. So you might start to see a theme in Joseph's life, and that is everything that could go wrong goes wrong, all right? So after this, Joseph was thrown in jail. In jail, he was seen to be a responsible person, so he was put in charge of all the other prisoners. And while there, he interpreted some dreams, but once the prisoner got free of the dreams that he had interpreted for, that man completely forgot about Joseph and left him behind. Joseph cannot seem to catch a break. His whole life up to this point is kind of one catastrophe after another, but it can all be traced to Joseph's brother's betrayal. Joseph was eventually remembered, and he ended up interpreting the Pharaoh's dreams. From there, Fortunately for Joseph, things got better. Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of the entire country. Joseph managed to save not just Egypt, but their neighbors from droughts and starvation, like the country that he had originally come from. And Egypt's doing okay, and lo and behold, who comes knocking on the door? Joseph's brothers, begging for food so they wouldn't starve. They didn't recognize Joseph until a long time later, and through a series of events set up to test what kind of people they had become. So this brings us to our text today. I think it's important to know all of that background and all of those hardships that Joseph went through when we hear this incredibly poignant text from Genesis 50. Realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us?" I want to pause here and say, you think? What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong we did to him? So they approached Joseph saying, "Your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now, therefore, please forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And then his brothers also wept, fell down before him and said, "We are here as your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones." And in this way, he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. That's astonishing. What on earth? I mean, really, what on earth made Joseph allow his brothers, even in the room, to ask for help, much less allow them to eventually ask for forgiveness? That's a big ask. Joseph's life was utterly destroyed when his brothers sold him into slavery. It was not about bearing just a little bit of a grudge. His life was ruined. He could have become a broken shell of a man. It's not hard to imagine. He had his moments with discouragement, fear, hopelessness. But when we read the long version, like the chapters and chapters and chapters of Joseph's story. Now, if you guys want that, I could go back and do that. We might be here past 11, though. But if we did go back and we did read the actual version, we hear about a man who is faithful, who again and again and again turns to God in his distress, who every single time something goes sideways, he goes toward his faith instead of away from it. And I think maybe that's the key in helping explain Joseph's faith. Honestly, just dogged determination to keep believing day in and day out that no matter what the day brings, he's going to keep his faith. Now, it might be battered and it might be bruised, but he's going to keep hanging on to it. It couldn't have been easy to keep that faith in the face of so many terrible things. And Joseph's story reminds me of other scriptures about faith and being determined to keep our faith alive and vibrant in the face of hardships. And in Hebrews 11, we hear, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. That's a faith that's saying, look, I don't know what tomorrow's going to be like. Today was pretty crummy. I don't know what tomorrow's going to be like, but my faith is coming with me wherever that day takes me. And if Joseph's life and if Joseph's faith isn't the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen, then I'm not quite sure what is. Joseph had so many reasons to give up, and yet he clung on until he was finally once again in a good place and position. But that wasn't guaranteed. He couldn't see into the future. He didn't know that those good things were coming when he held on to his faith in the darkness of his prison cell. He didn't know who was going to come knocking on the door. And who was the root cause of every single thing that he experienced? His brothers. And here they come, begging him for help. And what does he do? He doesn't kick him to the curb. He doesn't say, well, you're kind of reaping what you sow. He doesn't sell them into slavery. He doesn't throw them into jail. He doesn't take an eye for an eye. He doesn't take a life for a life. He sits there and he listens to their story. He shows compassion to them. He feeds them, and then he forgives them. He could have chosen so many other things, like anger, rage, even. He could have chosen rage. He could have chosen punishment. He could have chosen justice. He could have chosen bitterness. He could have carried those feelings around with him like a 1,000-pound weight on his back, and no one would have blamed him. And instead, that man chose forgiveness. Like, what? He knew something that we can learn, that forgiveness is the antidote to anger and bitterness. It is forgiveness that gives him life. It is forgiveness that has been rooting itself around in his heart for years. And it is forgiveness that has sustained his faith and made it resilient through all of the things that have gone wrong. All of the times when maybe, just maybe, his life was going to turn around only to see it snatched away from him again, forgiveness was there in his heart, waiting its turn to give his faith the strength it needed to go one more day. One more day. He didn't need to look 5 or 10 or 50 years down the road. He just needed one more day, and then the next, and one more day after that. We get in situations where life gets hard. Like, no one here is exempt from that, right? Where life is harder than it should be, harder than it needs to be, and we get discouraged. We get really discouraged, and things don't look great. And we feel tired, and we get burned out, and we get frustrated, because sometimes life is just hard work. And that's just regular life. That's not including any trauma or injustice or a terrible thing that's gone on in any of our relationships. And when life goes sideways and we're hurting, our faith can take a beating. It really can. And Joseph's answer to all of that was to forgive the people who were supposed to love him but didn't, who hurt him when they shouldn't have, who abused him or took advantage just because they could. And maybe the rest of us could learn a little something from that. That forgiveness, by the way, is not acceptance of wrong. So if you've been hurt, I'm not telling you to say, oh, that doesn't matter, because it matters. And forgiveness doesn't mean that you don't matter, because you do matter. Quite the opposite. It's the ultimate form of saying whatever happened to you does matter, but it does not define the rest of your life. Forgiveness is the ultimate resilient act of faith. It may be one of the hardest things we ever do, but also just maybe one of the most important. It's a release of what has hurt us and an embrace of our trust in God. And while faith doesn't guarantee us a pass from hard, hurtful things, it does guarantee us peace. And friends, we need peace more. We need peace more than we need anger and bitterness and resentment. Amen. I invite you all to pray with me. Holy God, you seek us when we are lost. You do not turn away from those who minimize and demean who we are. Help us to recognize the belovedness of every human being and all your creation. Give us courage and curiosity to engage with those that others would ignore or isolate. Let us rejoice on earth as you rejoice in heaven, as we make restoration, redemption, and reconciliation around us. Amen.